So deep beneath the Indian Ocean, there's a story, a really captivating one. It's a tale about a magnificent civilization, some truly epic floods, and a whole continent that just vanished. Today we're diving into the legend of Kumari Kandam.
You've probably heard of Atlantis, right? Plato's story about this incredible island nation that got swallowed up by the sea. I mean, it's a story that has fascinated people for centuries. But what if I told you that the Indian subcontinent has its very own version of that story? A tale of a lost world that's just as profound.
Yep, it's called Kumari Kandam, and this isn't some new story. For centuries, this legend has been a huge part of Tamil culture. We're talking about a story of a glorious golden age, an ancestral homeland that was tragically lost to the waves. So if we really want to get what this is all about, we've got to go back to the very beginning, to its source.
Okay, so the first clues about Kumari Kandam, they don't come from digging in the ground or looking at rocks. Nope. They come from words, written down thousands and thousands of years ago. Our search for this place really starts in the incredible literary traditions of ancient southern India.
The main place we find these stories is in what's called the Sangam literature. This is this huge collection of classical Tamil poems and epics. And you got to understand, these aren't exactly history textbooks. They were created by these amazing literary assemblies, or sangams. And what's wild is that these texts keep mentioning lands south of India getting completely consumed by the sea. And it's not just a quick little mention, It feels like a really deep cultural memory of a massive loss.
And the story gets so specific, it's pretty amazing. Later on, people who were studying these ancient texts, well, they weren't just picturing some tiny little island. They were describing a massive kingdom, one they said was made up of 49 distinct territories, which were called nadus. I mean, just listen to this. The world they were describing was so detailed. This lost continent was said to have 2 big rivers, the Paruli and the Kumari, plus 2 whole mountain ranges. This wasn't some empty wasteland. It was a thriving, developed place, ruled by the legendary Pandyan kings, who were famous for being huge supporters of Tamil culture. And right at the heart of this lost land were those Tamil Sangams, the literary academies we talked about. The story goes that the first 2, which, by the way, produced some of the greatest Tamil literature ever, were held in cities on Kumari Kandam. The first capital, a place called Thenmadurai, was totally lost to a flood. So the survivors, they set up a new capital, Kapadapuram, only for that to get swallowed by the sea too. Just gone. It was only after all that loss that the third and final Sangam was moved to the city of Madurai that we know today.
And this memory of loss, it's woven right into their most famous epics. Take this line from the Silapathikaram, which is one of the absolute masterpieces of Tamil literature. It talks about a Pandyan king going out and conquering lands way up north to make up for the territory his kingdom lost to the ocean. So you see, this idea of a great flood, it wasn't just some side story, it was a defining, catastrophic event. So for hundreds of years, this was a story that lived in poems and was passed down through generations. But then, in the 19th century, things took a really weird, fascinating turn. The legend basically crashed head-on into a scientific theory, one that we now know was totally wrong.
All right, I know this sounds like a trick question, but seriously, what on earth do lemurs have to do with an ancient legend like this? It's a bit strange, I'll give you that, but the answer is actually the key to understanding how the story of Kumari Kandam really took off in the modern age. It all comes down to a name some Western scientists gave to a make-believe continent. So let me introduce you to Lemuria. Back in 1864, a geologist named Philip Sclater had a real puzzle on his hands. He was seeing lemur fossils in Madagascar and in India, but nowhere in between, like in Africa or the Middle East. It just didn't make sense. So, to explain it, he came up with this idea of a lost land bridge, or maybe even a whole continent that connected the two, and he named it, you guessed it, Lemuria.
And you have to remember, this was way before we understood anything about plate tectonics. So back then, this idea of a giant land bridge seemed like a totally logical explanation. For a while, the scientific community was basically like, yep, that makes sense. It was the best theory they had for why you'd find these animals in such strange, far-apart places.
And this is where things get really interesting. In the early 20th century, Tamil thinkers and revivalists came across this Western theory of Lemuria. And for them, a movement that was all about celebrating the ancient history and unique identity of Tamil culture, this was like striking gold. It was this perfect fusion. Suddenly, their ancient legend Kumari Kandam had a modern, scientific-sounding name,
Lemuria. It gave it a kind of scientific legitimacy, even though the actual science behind Lemuria was already starting to fall apart.
So where does that leave us? What does modern science have to say about all this? I mean, can a whole continent just sink? Well, this is where we get into the actual geology and a much more believable, but honestly, just as dramatic explanation for where this legend might have come from.
Okay, let's just get this out of the way. Modern geology, with everything we know about plate tectonics, pretty much says no way. The idea of a huge continent just suddenly sinking into the ocean is, well, it's basically impossible. Think of it like this. Continental crust is lighter than the oceanic crust around it. It floats on top. It doesn't just decide to sink. So the theory of Lemuria and the idea of a literal sunken Kumari Kandam continent got debunked.
So you really see the two worlds clash here. On the one hand, you have this grand, epic myth of a massive sunken continent. And on the other, you have the actual documented reality, the real coastline of Tamil Nadu, with ancient ports that we know existed, places that were once bustling centers of trade. But wait, just because a continent didn't sink, does that mean the whole story is just made up? Not so fast. Science actually offers a really compelling alternative, one that doesn't involve breaking the laws of physics. The answer isn't about the land sinking, it's about the water rising.
And the scale of this is just mind-blowing. Think about it. About 18,000 years ago, during the last ice age, so much of the planet's water was frozen in giant glaciers that sea levels were about 100 meters lower than they are right now. That's more than 300 feet. That is a huge difference.
So, as the Earth started to warm up, all that ice melted. And where did the water go? Into the oceans. This caused this massive, steady rise in sea levels all over the world. We're talking about thousands of years of the water just creeping up, swallowing huge areas of coastal land. This includes the land that once connected India and Sri Lanka. Now imagine you're living there back then. From your perspective, the world is literally being swallowed by the sea. That's a real, terrifying experience, and it's absolutely the kind of story you would pass down for generations.
And that really brings us to the heart of it all. Because whether Kumari Kandam was a real continent or a powerful cultural memory of rising seas, its real power today isn't about geology. It's about what it means for Tamil identity.
You see, the story of Kumari Kandam is just such a powerful symbol. It's about a lost golden age, a time when Tamil civilization was at its absolute height. It backs up the idea that the Tamil language is one of the oldest in the world, and it's a huge source of cultural pride. For some, it's even seen as the cradle of all human civilization. But maybe most importantly, it's a story about survival, about resilience in the face of an unbelievable catastrophe.
So in the end, the reason this legend has lasted so long isn't really about finding physical proof. It's about its power as a cultural anchor. It's a story that explains origins, the greatness of ancestors, and this incredible ability to endure no matter what.
I love this quote because it just perfectly sums up the whole thing, doesn't it? All that is known is history, and the unknown remains mystery. We have the history part. We know about sea level rise. We have the ancient literature. But then there's the mystery, that powerful, compelling legend of a lost world that you can't quite pin down.
And that really leaves us with one last question to chew on. When we talk about whether a story like Kumari Kandam is true, what are we actually asking? Is truth something you can only find with physical evidence, with maps and shovels? Or can the truth of a story be found in the meaning it gives to people, in the pride and identity it has provided for millions, for thousands of years? It's something to think about.